My name is Ellie. I'm 27 years old. And for 3 years, my parents treated me like an ATM built on guilt. I kept telling myself that family sacrifices for family. But the moment that finally made the truth impossible to ignore came at their 35th wedding anniversary party. My mother raised her champagne glass, smiled at the crowd, and boasted, "We just booked our fifth luxury cruise." 80 guests cheered. My aunt clapped so hard her gold bracelets rattled. I had worked double shifts. I had eaten cheap ramen in my car. I had drained my own future to send them $74,300 for my dad's life-saving heart surgeries. I thought I was saving his life. I was wrong. But what my mother didn't know, as she stood there soaking up the applause, was that I was already walking toward the microphone. She had no idea I had a certified bank statement gripped in my hand. Once I read the real transfer destinations out loud, decades of their pristine public image was going to collapse in seconds. Before I go on, take a moment to like and subscribe, but only if this story speaks to you. Drop your location and local time in the comments. Now, let me take you back to the panicked phone call 3 years ago. The calls always started the same way. My dad's voice would be thin and raspy, like he was fighting for every breath, while my mother's voice hovered in the background, sharp with a kind of practiced panic. They lived in a house with crown molding and a lawn that looked like it belonged in a magazine, but they talked about money like they were 1 week away from the street. I remember sitting in their living room 3 years ago. I was 24, working as a junior analyst, and living in a studio apartment where the heater rattled all night. My parents were discussing their kitchen. "The granite is pitted, Ellie," my mother said. She ran her hand over the counter like she was touching a wound. "Our friends the Millers just redid theirs in white marble. It makes ours look so dated. It's embarrassing to have people over." I didn't say anything. I had just spent $400 on a new alternator for my car, and it had wiped out my fun budget for the next 2 months. I sat there in my work clothes, feeling the exhaustion in my shoulders while they sighed about stone slabs. "We'll just have to wait," my dad said, patting her hand. "Unless Ellie thinks the kitchen is fine." They both looked at me. It was a test. It was always a test to see if I was paying enough attention to their happiness. "It looks great, Mom," I said. The room went cold. My mother picked up her wine glass and looked out the window. "It's fine for you, I suppose. You don't have to entertain the garden club." That was the dynamic. Their wants were needs, and my needs were invisible. A few months later, the stakes shifted. My mother called me crying. Not the quiet kind of crying, but the loud, breathless sobbing that makes your stomach drop. "The Millers are going to the Amalfi Coast," she wailed. "And the Johnsons are doing a river cruise through France. Everyone is leaving, Ellie. We're just stuck here in this house, rotting. Your father worked so hard for 40 years, and we can't even afford a weekend in the city." I felt a twinge of guilt, but I couldn't help them. I had student loans, I had rent. I was eating eggs and toast for dinner most nights to keep my savings account growing. I told her I was sorry, but I didn't have any extra. She hung up on me. We didn't speak for 2 weeks. Then came the night that changed everything. It was a Tuesday. It was raining. My phone rang at 11:00 p.m. When I answered, I heard my father gasping. It sounded like he was drowning on dry land. "Ellie," he wheezed. "Something's wrong, my chest. It's like an elephant is sitting on it." "Dad, are you at the hospital?" I stood up so fast I knocked my lamp over. "We're at the emergency clinic." My mother took the phone. Her voice was a jagged whisper. "They say he needs a stent immediately. There's a blockage, but our insurance—" "Ellie, they're saying because of a paperwork lapse last month, we have to put down a deposit for the out-of-network specialist. They won't prep the ore without $15,000. $15,000? I felt dizzy. "Mom, call the main hospital. They have to treat him." "There isn't time," she screamed. Do you want your father to die because you're arguing about a deposit? He's gray, Ellie. He's literally turning gray in front of me. I could hear the heart monitor beeping in the background. It was a frantic, rhythmic chirping that felt like it was drilling into my skull. I didn't think. I didn't check the logic of a hospital demanding cash up front. I just saw my dad's face in my mind, smiling at me when I was a kid. I opened my laptop with shaking hands. I logged into my savings account. That money was my safety net. It was my one day I'll buy a house fund. It was $15,200. I'm sending it, I whispered. Tell the doctors I'm sending it now. I initiated the wire transfer to the account number my mother texted me. It was labeled Medical Escrow Services. I watched the balance on my screen drop to $200. I didn't sleep. I sat by the phone waiting for updates. My mother texted me at 4:00 a.m. He's out of surgery. Stable. You saved him, Ellie. We will never forget this. I printed the wire transfer receipt. I took a magnet and pinned it to my fridge. I needed to see it. I needed to remind myself that the reason I was going to be broke for the next year was because I had saved a life. That was the first receipt. It felt like a badge of honor. I didn't know yet that it was actually a ransom note. The next day, I went to work on 3 hours of sleep. I skipped lunch to save $5. When I got home, I looked at that piece of paper on the fridge. I told myself that money didn't matter. People mattered. Family mattered. I believed that with everything I had. A week later, my dad called me. He sounded better, stronger. I'm a walking miracle, Ellie, he said. The doctor says he's never seen anyone bounce back so fast, but the follow-up meds, they're specialized, not covered. Your mother is worried sick about the bills. How much, Dad? I asked. My voice was already tired. Just a few thousand for the first round, he said. We'll pay you back, sweetheart, every cent, as soon as the insurance settlement clears. I started a second job that weekend delivering groceries until midnight. I stopped buying coffee. I stopped going out. I became a ghost in my own life, moving between shifts and my silent apartment. I was 24 and I was already carrying the weight of 2 lives on my back. I thought that was what being a good daughter meant. I thought the silence in my bank account was the price of love. That was the first lie. The second wire transfer didn't feel like a choice. It felt like a ransom payment for my father's heart. My mother called me 3 days after the first surgery, her voice trembling so much I could hear the phone rattling against her earring. The specialist says the first stent isn't holding, Ellie. There's scar tissue. They have to go back in with a laser catheter, or he won't make it through the week. I was standing in the grocery store aisle, staring at a box of generic pasta that cost 89 cents. I looked at the total in my checking account, $214. My rent was due in 4 days. How much? I asked. I felt like I was hollowed out, just a shell of a person holding a plastic basket. They need $12,000 for the surgical suite and the tech team, she said. The insurance company is still reviewing the first claim. They're monsters, Ellie. They're letting your father die over a technicality. I didn't argue. I didn't ask why a hospital in Florida, where they were supposedly staying at a recovery boutique, functioned like a pawn shop. I went to my boss the next morning and asked for an advance on my quarterly bonus. When he said no, I went to a predatory payday lender in a strip mall. I walked out with a high-interest loan and a sense of nausea that didn't leave me for months. I sent the money. I didn't have enough left for my car insurance, so I stopped driving. My life began to shrink. It's a strange thing, how quickly your world narrows when you're bleeding money into someone else's crisis. I started taking the bus to my first job, then walking 2 miles to my second job at a call center. By the time I got home at 1:00 a.m., my feet were swollen and my head throbbed. The physical toll was one thing, but the social cost was a slow, agonizing burn. My best friend, Sarah, got married that June. She'd been my person since 3rd grade. We had planned her wedding in our heads since we were 10. "You're the maid of honor, obviously," she told me over coffee months earlier. But as the date got closer, the medical emergencies kept coming. A post-operative infection cost $8,000. A respiratory complication cost $5,500. Every time I managed to scrape together a few $100s for a plane ticket to Sarah's wedding, my mother would call with a new invoice and a new round of tears. "Your father's oxygen levels are dropping," she'd whisper. "If we can't pay for the private nurse tonight, I don't know if he'll wake up tomorrow." I looked at the flight booking screen on my laptop. The round-trip ticket to Chicago was $212. I looked at the medical escrow account number in my texts. I closed the travel tab. I sent the $200 to my parents. I had to call Sarah and tell her I couldn't make it. I didn't tell her the truth that I was broke because my mother had sworn me to secrecy. "Don't tell anyone your father is this sick," she had begged. "He's a proud man, Ellie. He doesn't want people looking at him with pity." So I lied to my best friend. I told her I had a work crisis I couldn't get out of. "A work crisis?" Sarah's voice was flat. "Ellie, I'm getting married once. I've reached out to you 4 times this week and you barely text back. If you don't want to be there, just say that." "It's not that, I promise," I said, my voice cracking. I wanted to scream. I wanted to tell her I was living on crackers and tap water so my dad didn't stop breathing. "Whatever," she said and hung up. She didn't invite me to the bachelorette party. She stopped sending me photos of her dress. When the wedding day came, I spent the afternoon delivering groceries in the rain, knowing I was losing the most important friendship of my life to save a man who was supposedly fighting for every breath. I felt like I was being erased. Every shift I worked, every meal I skipped, a little more of the Ellie I used to be disappeared. I stopped wearing makeup because I couldn't afford a new mascara. I stopped going to the dentist. My hair got dull, and I lost 12 pounds I couldn't afford to lose. One night, I caught a glimpse of myself in a shop window while walking home. I looked 40. My eyes were sunken, and there was a permanent line of tension between my brows. I looked like someone who had been through a war, and in a way, I had. I was the lone soldier on the front lines of my father's survival. By the end of that first year, the total I had sent topped $45,000. My credit score, which I had spent years carefully building, was in the 500s because of the payday loans and maxed-out credit cards I'd used to cover my own basic needs while my cash went to Florida. I remember calling my mom on a Tuesday night. I was sitting on my floor because I had sold my kitchen table on Facebook Marketplace for $40. "Mom, I'm tapped out," I said. "I literally have $11 in my account. I can't do any more." There was a long silence. Then I heard my father in the background. He didn't sound like he was wheezing. He sounded clear. "Tell her the new treatment is the only thing working, Margaret," he said. His voice was firm. "Ellie," my mother said, her tone suddenly cold. "We aren't asking for a vacation. We are asking for your father's life. If you want to stop, that's your choice. But you'll have to live with the consequences if his heart gives out because you decided you'd had enough." That was the hook they kept in me. The consequences. I went back to the call center and asked for more overtime. I stopped thinking about the future because I didn't have one anymore. My future was just a series of wire transfers and panicked phone calls. When the total finally hit $74,300, I reached a point of numbness. I didn't feel like a hero. I didn't even feel like a daughter. I felt like a machine. I was an ATM that processed grief into currency. I had given them my savings, my credit, my best friend, and my health. I thought I had given everything a person could give. I was wrong. There was still more they wanted to take. That was the cost of the first year. By the second year, the crisis had become our new normal. The heart surgeries had supposedly transitioned into a long-term recovery phase that required constant financial injections. My parents weren't living in our hometown anymore. They claimed the humidity was bad for my father's lungs, so they were staying at a holistic recovery clinic in a coastal town 4 states away. I hadn't seen them in person in 14 months. Every time I suggested driving down to visit, my mother would shut it down immediately. The doctors say any emotional stress could trigger a relapse, Ellie. He needs absolute quiet. Just send the money for the specialized physical therapy. That's how you can help. I was living in a state of permanent, vibrating anxiety. I worked my day job at the firm, then took the bus to the call center, and on Sundays I cleaned houses for cash. I was a ghost. I didn't go to movies. I didn't buy new clothes. I wore a winter coat with a broken zipper for 2 months because I couldn't justify the $60 to replace it. That $60 was half a cardiac supplement for my dad. The disconnect between my life and theirs started to show in small, jagged ways. I was walking to work in a freezing rain because I'd missed the bus and couldn't afford a $5 Uber. My shoes were soaked through and my toes were numb. I pulled out my phone to see a notification from Facebook. My mother had posted a photo. It was a sunset over the ocean. In the corner of the frame, I saw a glass of dark red wine and a small, turquoise box, the kind that usually holds expensive jewelry. The caption read, "Celebrating small victories today. Life is fragile but beautiful." I stared at that turquoise box while the rain dripped off my nose. I was $40 short on my rent for the month. I had eaten a single hard-boiled egg for breakfast. I called her. "Mom, I saw the photo. Is Dad okay? Did you guys buy something?" Her voice went from cheerful to defensive in a second. "That was a gift from a friend, Ellie. Someone who actually understands what we're going through." "Why are you checking up on me? Do you think I'm having fun while your father struggles to walk across the room?" "No, Mom, I'm struggling. My car is gone. I'm walking to work in the rain. I need $50 just to cover my rent this week. Can you send just 50 back from what I sent yesterday?" There was a long, cold sigh. "Ellie, honestly, your father's medication is bleeding us dry. We are pennies away from the street ourselves, and you're calling us for rent money. Have some perspective. We've sacrificed everything for this family." She hung up. I stood on the sidewalk and cried. It wasn't a dramatic sob. It was just a quiet leak of salt water that mixed with the rain. I felt like I was drowning, and the people I was trying to save were stepping on my head to stay dry. The clinic they were at was apparently a dead zone for cell service, too. They would go dark for 2 or 3 weeks at a time. I would send desperate texts asking if Dad was still alive, and I'd get no response until a new invoice needed paying. Then, like magic, my mother would call, sounding frantic and exhausted, detailing a new emergency that required a wire transfer within 24 hours. "The clinic says they'll have to discharge him if we don't clear the balance," she'd sob. I started selling things I actually needed. I sold my laptop and used a library computer to do my side work. I sold a necklace my grandmother had left me. I was hollowed out, but the people around my parents seemed to think they were thriving. My Aunt Sarah, not the friend I'd lost, but my mother's sister, called me one afternoon. She sounded upbeat, almost giddy. "Ellie, I just talked to your mother. She says your dad is doing so well. They're thinking about hosting a big blowout for their 35th anniversary next year. Isn't that wonderful? A real celebration of life." "A party?" I asked. My voice sounded like it belonged to a stranger. "Aunt Sarah, how are they paying for a party? I thought they were broke." "Oh, you know your mother," my aunt laughed. "She says the universe provides." She mentioned something about a generous donor from their old church group. She's already looking at venues. She wants the Crystal Ballroom at the Heights. The Heights, the most expensive banquet hall in the county. I sat in my dark apartment, looking at the empty space where my kitchen table used to be. I had sent them $74,000, $300 over 3 years. I was facing eviction because I'd prioritized their medical escrow over my own roof. I was 27 years old, and I had the net worth of a teenager, while my mother was scouting crystal ballrooms. A sharp, cold suspicion began to grow in the center of my chest. It wasn't a sudden epiphany. It was more like a slow leak of light into a very dark room. I looked at the wire transfer receipts on my fridge. There were dozens of them now, a paper trail of my own destruction. I noticed something I hadn't looked at closely before. The account name was Medical Escrow Services, but the bank was located in a small town near a major cruise port. I told myself I was being paranoid. I told myself that hospitals use third-party billing. I told myself my parents loved me. But for the first time in 3 years, I didn't send the next $2,000 maintenance fee my mother requested. I waited. She called 3 times that night. She left a voicemail saying Dad was having chest pains because of the stress of the unpaid bill. I didn't call back. Instead, I took a day off work, a day I couldn't afford, and walked 3 miles to the main branch of my bank. I needed to see someone in person. I needed to know exactly where my life had gone. That was the first time I stopped being a victim and started being a witness. The realization didn't hit me like a lightning bolt. It was more like a slow, cold seepage of water through a basement wall. By the time I noticed the flooding, the foundation was already gone. It started with the invitation. It arrived in my mailbox on a Tuesday, a heavy, cream-colored envelope with gold foil lettering. It was an invitation to my parents' 35th wedding anniversary party. The venue was the Heights, the most exclusive banquet hall in the county, the kind of place where they charge you $50 just to valet your car. I sat on my floor, leaning against the wall where my sofa used to be before I sold it to pay for Dad's cardiac rehab, and stared at the gold foil. The party was 3 weeks away. Open bar, 5-course plated dinner, live band. My phone buzzed. It was Aunt Sarah. "Ellie, did you get the invite? Isn't it just a miracle? After everything your father has been through, to be able to celebrate like this. Your mother told me a generous donor from the church heard about your struggles and decided to fund the whole thing as a celebration of life. Isn't that just like the Lord?" "A donor?" I asked. My voice felt like it was coming from the bottom of a well. "Aunt Sarah, do you know who this donor is?" "Oh, she said they wanted to remain anonymous. But they must be very wealthy. The guest list is huge, 80 people. Everyone from the old neighborhood is coming. Your mother is even buying a new designer gown. She said she needs to look her best for the triumph over tragedy photos." I hung up and looked at my bank balance. $14.22. I hadn't bought new shoes in 2 years. I was wearing a pair of old sneakers with a hole in the toe that I'd colored in with a black Sharpie so people at the office wouldn't notice. I was working 60 hours a week, and I was still 2 months behind on my electric bill. The next morning, I walked to work. I passed a travel agency downtown. In the window, there was a poster of a massive white ship cutting through turquoise water. "Experience the Mediterranean," the sign said. I thought about the account name, Medical Escrow Services. I thought about the routing number I'd seen on my bank app, the one that originated in a town near the port of Miami. I didn't go to my office. I walked past the building and kept going until I reached the main branch of my bank. I didn't want to use the app anymore. I didn't want to look at a screen. I needed a human being to tell me I was wrong. I needed someone to look at the numbers and tell me that Medical Escrow Services was a legitimate hospital billing company and that I was just a tired, paranoid daughter. The bank was quiet, smelling of floor wax and expensive air conditioning. I waited in line, my hands shoved deep into the pockets of my coat to hide my chipped fingernails. When it was my turn, I asked to see a manager about a series of wire transfers. I was led to a small office in the back. The nameplate on the desk said Mrs. Higgins. She was a woman in her 60s with sharp, silver hair and glasses on a chain. She looked like the kind of woman who didn't tolerate mistakes. "I've been sending money to my parents for 3 years," I told her. My voice was shaking. "For medical bills, over $74,000, but something feels off. I just need to verify the recipient of these wires." I handed her my phone with the transfer history pulled up. Mrs. Higgins put on her glasses and began to type. The click-clack of the keyboard was the only sound in the room. "The account is titled Medical Escrow Services," she murmured. "Let me look at the underlying registration for that business name." She clicked a few more times. I watched her face. I expected her to nod and say everything was fine. I expected her to give me a sympathetic look and tell me to go home and get some rest. Instead, her eyebrows shot up. She leaned closer to the monitor. "Is there a problem?" I asked. Mrs. Higgins didn't look at me. She turned the monitor around. "This isn't a medical account, dear," she said, her voice dropping into a tone of professional pity. "The Medical Escrow Services business name is a doing business as registered to a parent corporation called Azure Horizon Travels. It's a boutique agency that specializes in high-end luxury cruises." The room tilted. I felt the air leave my lungs. "Cruises," I whispered. "The money didn't go to a hospital," Mrs. Higgins said. "It was used to pay off a revolving credit line held by the travel agency. Every wire transfer you sent, the $15,000, the $12,000, the $8,000, matches perfectly with deposit deadlines for a series of world tour." I looked at the screen. I saw the dates. The $15,000 I sent for my father's emergency stent was sent exactly 48 hours before a Royal Caribbean Diamond Suite was paid in full. The $8,000 I sent for his post-operative infection was the final payment for a 7-day Rhine River journey. My father wasn't dying. He was traveling. "Wait," I said, my voice cracking. "Is there any record of payments to a hospital, a clinic, a doctor?" Mrs. Higgins scrolled through the entire history. "No. Every single dollar you sent went to Azure Horizon. And looking at the spending on the other side of that account, it looks like they've been living quite well. Fine dining, excursions, jewelry." I thought about the turquoise box in my mother's Facebook photo. I thought about the ramen I'd eaten for dinner every night for 1,000 days. I thought about the car I'd lost, the friend I'd insulted, the life I'd put on hold to save a man who was currently sipping champagne on a deck somewhere in the Atlantic. "I need copies," I said. My voice was cold now, the shaking had stopped. "I need certified, stamped copies of every transfer and the registration of the recipient account." Mrs. Higgins looked at me for a long time. She saw the hole in my sneaker. She saw the exhaustion in my eyes. "I'll print them right now," she said. As the printer started to hum, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from my mother. "Ellie, just checking in. Your father's breathing is a bit heavy today. The doctor says he needs a new portable oxygen concentrator. It's $2,400. Can you get that to us by Friday? We want him to be able to enjoy the anniversary party." I didn't reply. I watched the paper slide out of the printer. I had been the family's ATM for 3 years. But the machine was officially out of order. That was the trap. I didn't go back to my apartment after leaving the bank. I couldn't. The 4 walls of that studio, the ones I'd stripped of furniture to pay for fake surgeries, felt like they were closing in on me. I went to a small park across from the branch and sat on a bench, clutching the manila envelope Mrs. Higgins had given me. The weight of the paper felt like lead. It was the physical manifestation of 3 years of my life. $74,300. It wasn't just a number. It was the car I didn't have. It was the friendship with Sarah I'd let wither. It was the health I'd neglected and the sleep I'd traded for double shifts. My phone buzzed again. It was my mother. "Ellie, did you get my message about the oxygen concentrator? Dad is having a rough afternoon. Please don't make us wait. For the first time in my life, I didn't feel the familiar surge of panic. I didn't feel the need to fix it. I felt a cold, hard clarity. I realized that my mother wasn't checking in on my father. She was checking the balance of her favorite account. I needed to see Mrs. Higgins one more time. I walked back into the bank. She was just finishing with a customer when she saw me. She didn't look annoyed. She looked like she'd been waiting for me to return. She waved me into her office and closed the door. "I can't believe it," I said, setting the envelope on her desk. "He was never sick. All those nights I spent crying. He was on a boat." "I've seen a lot in 30 years of banking, Ellie," Mrs. Higgins said softly. She leaned forward, her silver hair catching the light. "I've seen families do terrible things for money, but using a child's fear for their parents' life, that's a special kind of cruelty. I have to stop them," I said. "But if I just tell them I know, they'll lie. They'll say they were investing the money for our future, or they'll say the travel agency was just a middleman for a specialized clinic. They have an answer for everything." Mrs. Higgins nodded. She reached into a drawer and pulled out a yellow highlighter. "Then don't just tell them, show the people who matter. Look here." She opened the file and began highlighting specific dates. She pointed to a wire transfer I'd sent on February 14th, the $8,000 for the infection. Then she pulled up a public social media archive on her computer. She found my mother's old Instagram, which I'd been blocked from seeing for months. "On February 16th, Mrs. Higgins said, pointing at the screen, "your mother posted a photo of a sunset in the Caribbean. She used the hashtag #LivingMyBestLife. She forgot to hide her location tag. It was sent from a Royal Caribbean ship called Symphony of the Seas." I stared at the screen. My mother was wearing a wide-brimmed straw hat and holding a drink with a tiny umbrella. She looked radiant. She didn't look like a woman sitting in a hospital waiting room praying for her husband's heart to keep beating. "This is the clarity you need," Mrs. Higgins said. "You aren't a daughter being disloyal. You are a victim of a coordinated financial scam. In most states, this would be a criminal matter." "I don't want them in jail," I whispered. "I just want everyone to know. I want the world they've built with my money to stop existing." "Then you have everything you need right here," she said, tapping the certified statements. "The routing numbers don't lie, the corporate registrations don't lie, and most importantly, the bank's official stamp doesn't lie. This is your truth, Ellie. It's documented." I stood up and took the papers. Mrs. Higgins walked me to the door. She didn't give me a professional handshake. She put a hand on my shoulder and looked me in the eye. "You've been carrying them for 3 years," she said. "It's okay to let go. They aren't going to fall. They're going to land exactly where they deserve." I walked out of the bank and headed toward the bus stop. My mind was already moving toward the anniversary party, the guests, the generous donor, the crystal ballroom. My mother wanted a triumph over tragedy celebration. She was going to get one, but it wasn't going to be her triumph. I stopped by a drugstore and bought a single, high-quality red folder. I tucked the certified statements inside. I didn't cry. I didn't feel guilty. For the first time since my dad's first surgery, I felt like I could breathe. I spent the rest of the evening at the library, using their free internet to cross-reference every medical emergency with the travel agency's cruise schedule. It was a perfect map. Every time I felt a spark of doubt, I just looked at the dates. July 12th, $5,000 for emergency diagnostics. July 14th, booking confirmed for a Mediterranean grandeur suite. October 3rd, $3,500 for respiratory equipment. October 5th, excursion deposit paid for private tour of the Vatican. They hadn't even been clever about it. They just assumed I would never look. They'd assumed I was so blinded by the fear of losing them that I'd never check the receipt. They were right for 3 years, but that was over now. Support doesn't always come in the form of a hug. Sometimes it comes in the form of a bank manager with a highlighter and a set of cold, hard facts. I went home to my empty apartment and ate a bowl of white rice. I looked at the red folder on my floor. I knew what I had to do. I didn't need to yell. I didn't need to make a scene. I just needed to tell the truth in the only place it would actually hurt them, in front of their audience. The red folder sat on my passenger seat like a live wire. It was thin, but it contained enough high-voltage truth to burn down the entire facade my parents had built. Inside were the certified copies Mrs. Higgins had stamped. I had gone a step further after leaving the bank. I went to the local library and used a public terminal to print out the terms and conditions and corporate structure pages for Azure Horizon Travels. I also printed the business registration from the Florida Secretary of State's website. It was all right there. The medical escrow services account that I had been sending $74,300 to was legally a secondary merchant account for a luxury cruise agency. There was no hospital. There were no stents. There were only shore excursions and balcony suites. I looked at the specific dates one more time. March 14th, I sent $12,000 for a laser catheter surgery. March 16th, my father's name appeared on a passenger manifest for a Spirit of the Danube River cruise. The leverage was complete. It wasn't just a suspicion anymore, it was a documented timeline of theft. They had leveraged my love to fund their leisure. They had watched me sell my furniture, walk to work in the rain, and lose my best friend, all while they were deciding between the lobster and the filet mignon on a Lido deck. My mother called me that evening. I let it go to voicemail. "Ellie, it's me." Her voice was airy, practiced. "We're finalizing the guest list for the anniversary. Aunt Sarah says you haven't RSVP'd. We really need you there, honey. It's a celebration of your father's survival, and you're the one who made it possible. We want to give you a special mention in the toast." A special mention. They wanted me there as a prop. They wanted the exhausted, broke daughter to stand there so they could look like the brave, resilient parents who had overcome a tragedy. My presence would validate their lies. If I was there, smiling, then the medical crisis must have been real. I realized then that they weren't just stealing my money. They were stealing my witness. I picked up the red folder and put it in my work bag. I didn't call her back. I didn't text her about the oxygen concentrator she claimed they needed. I just went to my second job at the call center and worked an 8-hour shift. I spent the whole time talking to people about their billing cycles, my voice calm and professional, while my mind was calculating the seating chart at the Heights. I knew the room. I knew the 80 people who would be there. These were people who had known my parents for 30 years. People who had sent cards, said prayers, and probably donated to that anonymous church fund my mother kept mentioning. They were victims, too, but I was the one who had the receipts. I didn't want to just stop the payments. I wanted to stop the story. I stopped by the dry cleaners on my way home. I had one nice dress left, a simple black one I'd bought for a job interview years ago. I'd kept it in a plastic bag in the back of my closet. I paid the $5 to have it pressed. It was the last $5 I had until my next paycheck, but it didn't matter. I wasn't going to a party. I was going to an audit. The leverage wasn't just the paper, it was the timing. If I confronted them at home, they'd cry, they'd gaslight me, they'd find a way to make me feel like the monster for doubting them. But in a room full of 80 people, with a microphone in my hand and a certified bank statement in my fingers, they wouldn't have anywhere to hide. My father was a walking miracle. Well, I was about to show everyone exactly what kind of miracle he was. I sat in my apartment that night, the silence finally feeling like a weapon rather than a weight. I thought about the $74,300. I thought about the 3 years of my life. I couldn't get the money back and I couldn't get the time back, but I could get the truth back. I practiced what I would say. I kept it short. I kept it plain. No metaphors, no screaming, just the numbers, just the dates, just the name of the travel agency. I looked at the red folder one last time before I went to bed. The bank's gold seal was pressed firmly into the corner of the top page. It looked official. It looked final. That was the moment I stopped being afraid of them. They had spent 3 years making me feel like I was responsible for their life or death. Now I was the one holding the record of their choices. The leverage was ready. The countdown had begun. I didn't call them back. I didn't text. I spent the next 4 days in a state of quiet, vibrating preparation. Every time my phone buzzed with a message from my mother about Dad's fatigue or oxygen levels, I simply moved the red folder to a different spot in my apartment. I needed to see it constantly. I needed the weight of those certified bank statements to remind me that I wasn't being cruel. I was being accurate. The logistical move was simple, but required a level of coldness I didn't know I possessed. I called the banquet manager at the Heights. "This is Ellie, the daughter of the anniversary couple," I said. My voice was steady, professional. "My mother mentioned there's a tribute video and a microphone set up for toasts. I just wanted to confirm the timing." "Oh, yes, Ms. Ellie," the manager chirped. "The toasts are scheduled for 8:30 p.m. right after the main course. Your mother requested a wireless mic so she can move around the room. She said you might have a few words as well." "I definitely will," I said. "And the anonymous donor who settled the bill, did they leave a name for the tax receipt?" There was a brief pause, the sound of papers shuffling. "Actually, the final balance was paid via a series of smaller wire transfers over the last 3 years into a holding account. It's unusual, but your mother said it was a rolling medical miracle fund. It's all settled. A rolling medical miracle fund. My rent money, my car repairs, my dental work." I thanked her and hung up. The logistics were locked. I knew where the mic would be, when the room would be most quiet, and exactly how the bill had been laundered through their vanity. The emotional move happened on Friday night, 24 hours before the party. I was sitting on the floor of my apartment eating a bowl of plain rice when I found an old photo of my dad from when I was 10. He was holding me on his shoulders at the beach. He looked younger, sure, but he looked like the man I thought I was saving. I waited for the guilt to hit me. I waited for that familiar, sickening pull in my gut that told me I was a bad daughter for even thinking about exposing him. It didn't come. Instead, I looked at my own hands. My skin was dry from the cleaning chemicals at my third job. My nails were bitten down to the quick. I looked at the hole in my sneaker. I realized that the man in that photo had died a long time ago, replaced by a man who could watch his daughter wither away so he could take a cruise. I put the photo face down. I didn't cry. I just felt a profound sense of relief that the mystery was over. The risk move was the hardest. I had exactly $60 left in an old jar. I could have used it for groceries or to put a small dent in my electric bill. Instead, I walked to a local print shop. "I need 80 copies of this," I told the guy behind the counter. I handed him the one-page summary I'd prepared, a side-by-side comparison of the wire transfer dates and the corresponding cruise itineraries. At the top, in plain, bold letters, I'd written the $74,300 anniversary. The clerk looked at the paper, then at me. He saw the red folder. He didn't ask questions. He just ran the copies. I watched the machine spit them out, 80 identical sheets of truth. I folded them neatly and put them in my bag. If I walked into that room and just spoke, they could claim I was crazy. They could say I was bitter. But if every guest was holding the bank's own stamps in their hands, there would be no debate. The risk was total. If I did this, I was losing my parents forever. There would be no fixing it. No going back to Sunday dinners or pretending. I was choosing to be an orphan of my own making. Saturday morning arrived with a gray, oppressive sky. I put on the black dress I'd had pressed. I did my makeup carefully, using the last of a concealer stick to hide the dark circles under my eyes. I looked in the mirror and didn't see the ATM anymore. I saw a witness. I drove my beat-up car toward the heights. Every rattle of the engine felt like a countdown. I pulled into the lot, parking my rusted sedan between a Lexus and a Mercedes. The valet looked at my car with a sneer, but I didn't care. I handed him the keys and gripped the red folder against my chest. I walked toward the banquet hall entrance. I could hear the muffled sound of a string quartet playing something upbeat and expensive. I could smell the expensive lilies and the scent of roasting prime rib. My mother was standing near the door in a gown the color of a tropical ocean. It was silk, shimmering under the crystal chandeliers. She was laughing, her hand resting on the arm of a woman I recognized from their church. "Oh, it was a long road," my mother was saying, her voice carrying that perfect, tragic lilt. "But seeing him stand here today, it's worth every struggle." She saw me. Her eyes swept over my plain black dress, a flicker of disappointment crossing her face before she replaced it with a saintly smile. "Ellie, you made it, you look. Well, you look tired, honey. But come in, come in. Your father is by the head table. He's been telling everyone how his guardian angel daughter kept his heart beating." She reached out to hug me, and for a second the scent of her expensive perfume nearly made me gag. It smelled like my missing savings. "I'm here, Mom," I said. My voice was a flat, dead thing. "Good, we're starting the toast soon. Make sure you're close to the front." I walked past her into the room. 80 guests, 80 glasses of vintage champagne. My father was at the center of a circle of men, looking robust and tanned, his heart condition apparently cured by the Mediterranean sun. I took a seat at a table in the very back near the service door. I unzipped my bag and felt the edges of the 80 copies. The quartet stopped playing. The banquet manager stepped to the front and tapped the microphone. "Ladies and gentlemen, if you could please take your seats. We are about to begin our tribute to 35 years of love and resilience." The room went quiet. The lights dimmed. My mother began to walk toward the stage, her silk gown whispering against the floor. I stood up. I didn't wait for her to start. I started walking down the side aisle, the red folder tucked under my arm, the 80 copies ready in my bag. I reached the threshold of the stage just as she took the microphone. She smiled at the crowd. She raised her glass. "We just booked our 5th luxury cruise," she boasted, her voice ringing out through the speakers. The room erupted in applause. My Aunt Sarah clapped so hard her gold bracelets rattled like a warning. This was it, the threshold. I stepped out of the shadows and into the light of the podium. My mother's hand was still in the air, her champagne glass catching the light from the crystal chandeliers. She looked like a queen surveying her kingdom. The applause was loud, a warm wave of approval from 80 people who believed they were witnessing a miracle of survival. I didn't run. I didn't scream. I just kept walking until I was standing 3 feet away from her. "Mom," I said. My voice wasn't loud, but I was standing right next to her wireless microphone. It picked up my whisper and sent it echoing through the ballroom. The applause faltered. My mother's smile didn't drop, but it tightened. Her eyes flicked to me, sharp and warning. "Ellie, honey, I was just about to call you up. Why don't you wait for the video to finish?" "I don't think we need the video," I said. I reached out and firmly took the microphone from her hand. She didn't let go at first. We stood there for a heartbeat, both gripping the silver handle. The room went quiet. I saw Aunt Sarah lean forward, her brow furrowed. I saw my father, 10 feet away at the head table, slowly lower his fork. His tan seemed to pale under the stage lights. I pulled. My mother let go, her face a mask of polite confusion. "Hi, everyone," I said into the mic. My voice was steady. It sounded like someone else's voice, cool, professional, and utterly detached. "Most of you know me as Ellie. And most of you know that for the last 3 years, my father has been fighting for his life." A murmur of sympathy rippled through the room. A few people nodded. One woman in the front row dabbed at her eyes with a silk napkin. "I've spent those 3 years working 3 jobs," I continued. "I sold my car. I lost my apartment. I missed my best friend's wedding. I sent exactly $74,300 to an account for my father's heart surgeries. I thought I was saving his life. I looked directly at my father. He wasn't looking at me, he was looking at the exit. But I was confused about the terminology, I said. You see, I recently learned that in my parents' house, heart surgery is actually code for something else. It's code for a balcony suite on a luxury liner. The silence in the room changed. It went from respectful to heavy, like the air before a tornado. My mother stepped forward, her hand reaching for the mic again. Ellie, you're clearly exhausted, she said, her voice dripping with fake maternal concern. The stress of the last few years has been too much for you. You're confused, sweetheart. Let's go sit down. I'm not confused, Mom, I said, stepping back so she couldn't reach me. I'm documented. I reached into my bag and pulled out the stack of 80 copies. I didn't hand them out myself. I walked to the edge of the stage and handed the stack to the banquet manager, who was standing there looking stunned. Please pass these around, I said. I want everyone to see the medical miracle for themselves. The manager, acting on pure reflex, took the papers and began handing them to the first table. It was like watching a virus spread through a crowd. One person would look, gasp, and then pass it to the next. The rustle of paper was the only sound in the room. If you look at the first page, I said, my voice cutting through the growing whispers, you'll see a wire transfer I sent on March 14th for $12,000. That was for Dad's emergency laser catheter surgery. On page 2, you'll see the passenger manifest for the Danube River cruise. Dad's name is right there. He checked in 48 hours after I took out a payday loan to cover his life. That's a lie, my mother shrieked. She didn't sound like a saint anymore. She sounded like a cornered animal. Those are forgeries. You're trying to ruin us because you're bitter and selfish. They aren't forgeries, Mom. They're certified by the bank. There's a gold seal on every page. Any of the church elders in this room can verify the routing numbers right now on their phones. At table 3, a man stood up. It was Mr. Henderson, the head of the church finance committee. He was holding the paper close to his eyes. He looked at the paper, then at my father, then back at the paper. Margaret, Mr. Henderson said, his voice booming in the quiet room. This account number. This is the same one you gave the church for the Brother in Need Fund. We sent $4,000 to this account last month. The room inhaled as one. It wasn't just my money. They had been grifting the whole community. My father finally stood up. He didn't look like a sick man. He looked like a man who was about to lose everything. He walked toward the stage, his face purple. Ellie, shut up. Give me that microphone right now. You have no idea what you're talking about. I have 74,000 ideas of what I'm talking about, Dad, I said. He reached the stage and tried to grab my arm. I didn't flinch. I stayed right where I was. 2 of his old friends, men who had probably written checks to help with his medication, stepped into his path. Let her finish, George, one of them said. His voice was cold. I looked at the room. People were standing up, not to applaud, but to get a better look at the monsters in the center of the ballroom. Aunt Sarah was staring at my mother, her mouth hanging open. She looked at her own gold bracelets, then looked at the paper in her hand, and slowly she unclipped the bracelets and set them on the table. It was the quietest gesture of disgust I'd ever seen. The 5th luxury cruise my mother just boasted about, I said, looking at the crowd. That was paid for with the money I was supposed to use for my rent this month. I'm being evicted on Tuesday, but it's okay. I'm sure the Mediterranean is lovely this time of year. My mother was shaking. She looked at the guests, her eyes searching for one friendly face, one person who would believe her, but the room had turned. The miracle was dead. You're a monster, she whispered to me, the microphone catching it. After everything we did for you. You didn't do anything for me, Mom, I said. You used me as a line of credit, but the limit has been reached. I walked to the head table. I took the red folder out of my bag and set it down right in front of my father's dinner plate next to his untouched prime rib. "Here's the rest of the file," I said, "in case the IRS wants to see how Medical Escrow Services handles their taxes." The word IRS hit the room like a physical blow. My father sank back into his chair. He looked old then, truly old. But not because of his heart. He looked old because the mask had been ripped off and there was nothing underneath but greed. I turned back to the microphone one last time. "The bar is open," I said, "but I'd suggest checking the receipts." I handed the microphone back to the banquet manager. I didn't wait for a response. I didn't wait for my mother's next scream or my father's next lie. I walked down the center aisle. 80 people watched me pass. Nobody stopped me. Nobody said a word. The only sound was the clicking of my heels on the marble and the distant, frantic rustle of 80 pieces of paper being read and reread. As I reached the door, I heard a chair crash over. "Margaret, explain this." Mr. Henderson's voice was a roar. I pushed through the heavy oak doors and into the cool night air. The valet brought my rusted sedan around. He didn't sneer this time. He looked at the banquet hall, where the shouting was just starting to get loud enough to hear through the walls, and then he looked at me. "You okay, miss?" he asked. "I'm fine," I said. I tipped him the last $5 I had in the world. I got into my car, drove out of the parking lot, and didn't look back at the lights of the Heights. I had $14.22 in my bank account. I had an eviction notice waiting at home. I had no family left. And for the first time in 3 years, my chest didn't feel tight. I could breathe. The aftermath wasn't a clean explosion. It was a slow, agonizing leak. I stood by my car in the parking lot of the Heights and watched the first few guests trickle out long before the cake was supposed to be served. They didn't look like people leaving a party. They looked like people leaving a funeral. Mr. Henderson was the first to drive away, his face set in a grim, stony mask. He didn't even look at me as he passed, but he didn't have to. The folders in the back seats of those luxury cars were doing all the talking. I went back to my apartment and sat on the floor. I didn't turn on the lights. I just watched the shadows of passing cars stretch across the ceiling. My phone started blowing up around midnight. I didn't answer. I didn't even read the texts. I knew the cycle. First would be the rage, then the bargaining, then the "how could you do this to your father's health?" Guilt tripping. I deleted the voicemail notifications without listening. I had heard enough of their voices to last 3 lifetimes. By Tuesday, I was packed. I couldn't stop the eviction, and honestly, I didn't want to. That apartment was a tomb of my own making, a place where I had starved myself to feed their greed. I took my one suitcase and the clothes on my back and moved into a small room in a shared house near the outskirts of the city. It was loud, the kitchen smelled like stale spices, and the carpet was stained, but it was mine. Every dollar I earned from my double shift stayed in my pocket. I bought a gallon of milk and a loaf of fresh bread, and I didn't have to check my balance once. My parents' fall from grace was absolute. In a suburban circle built entirely on optics and standing, being exposed as a couple who fleeced their own child to pay for cruises is a social death sentence. Aunt Sarah sent me a long email 3 weeks later. She told me the church had launched a formal audit into the medical fund they'd contributed to. My parents had been asked to leave their country club. They were selling the house with the crown molding and the perfect lawn to pay back the anonymous donors, who weren't so anonymous anymore once a paper trail existed. I didn't feel happy about it. I just felt finished. It's been 6 months now. I'm sitting in my new apartment, a real one this time, with a small table and 2 chairs. I'm eating a warm dinner of roasted chicken and vegetables. No ramen, no crackers. My credit score is slowly crawling back up, point by painful point. I haven't spoken to my parents since I dropped the mic. I changed my number, and I didn't give the new one to anyone who still talks to them. The most expensive thing I own isn't a car or a designer bag. It's the silence. It's the ability to hear my phone ring and not feel my heart hammer against my ribs in terror. I'm 27 and I'm finally starting my life. I'm behind my peers, and my bank account is modest, but every cent in it belongs to my future, not someone else's vacation. Sacrificing for family is a noble thing, but a family that asks you to destroy yourself so they can thrive isn't a family at all. They're just a debt you don't owe. I look at the empty chair across from me and I smile. It's empty because I chose for it to be, not because I couldn't afford to fill it. That is the only miracle I ever needed. What would you have done the second you saw that bank manager turn the monitor around? Would you have confronted them privately, or did they earn the public audit? Let me know in the comments if you've ever had a family member invent an emergency just to get into your wallet. I read every story. If you want to hear about another family whose medical secret was exposed by a simple grocery store receipt, check out the story linked in the description. Don't forget to like and subscribe if you believe that boundaries are the highest form of self-love. It really helps the channel. Thanks for listening.